Gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Gowdy, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, I'm actually a big fan of law enforcement, and I don't take any delight in asking the questions I'm going to ask you. But law enforcement are given unique powers in our society, and with those unique powers come unique responsibilities. And I can't think of any responsibility greater than guarding the safety and security of our President and his family. So as I understand it, several agents believed that shots were fired, and a supervisor concluded that it was a vehicle backfiring. Even if that were true, given the very small investment of resources, why not investigate the shots fired?
Representative, I think that is where some of the confusion starts to come out, is the story that's in the Washington Post.
I'm not asking you about a Washington Post story. I'm asking you about why a housekeeper who doesn't go to Glencoe, who doesn't spend 14 weeks in training, who doesn't have 18 weeks of training thereafter, found glass, and your agents did not. That didn't come from the Washington Post. Is that true? Did a housekeeper find evidence of the shooting and your agents did not?
The housekeeper was able to locate fragments of glass on the Truman balcony, which is not an area that is frequented by security personnel.
And I didn't ask you about who is frequent. I asked you, there was a spontaneous conclusion that shots were fired. There were officers who believed they smelled gunpowder. Your officers drew their weapons, Director. That's how seriously they took it. So I'm not interested in cursory searches. When did your agency find evidence of the shooting?
I believe it was on the 15th or 14th of November.
Which was how many days after the shooting?
3 to 4 days later.
All right. So you have an officer contemporaneous with the shooting believing that shots were fired. You have officers taking cover because they believe shots were fired. You have officers at the White House drawing their weapons because they believe shots were fired. Now give me all the evidence to support a vehicle backfiring.
Representative, I am sure your familiarity with law enforcement in downtown areas, there is sound attenuation. Oftentimes,
I've never heard a car backfire 6 to 8 times, Director, ever. Have you?
I've heard car backfires, but I don't think
6 to 8 times.
I think it's undisputed that there were witnesses that observed shots being fired.
Right, and it is also undisputed that a housekeeper who doesn't train at Glencoe, who doesn't have 18 weeks of intensive training, found the evidence of the shooting, and your agency did not. And I'm going to give you credit because you didn't bring it up. It was brought up by a colleague. I have some colleagues who are just obsessed with sequestration. We can't have any hearing without it coming up. But you're not going to sit there and tell us that sequestration is the reason your agency did not find evidence of the shooting, are you?
No, I am not.
Okay. And I give you credit for that. And I was stunned that one of my colleagues would try to conflate, to use the Attorney General's word, sequestration with the fact that a law enforcement agency waited 4 or 5 days to find evidence of a shooting that a housekeeper found. So give me all the evidence to back the vehicle backfiring narrative, because we already know all the evidence to support the shooting. Give me all the evidence that made your department so sure that it was a vehicle backfiring that you didn't even search the White House.
The Secret Service was actively engaged with the United States Park Police in an effort to determine where and what direction the shots were fired on Constitution Avenue.
Madam Director, you reached the conclusion that it was a vehicle backfiring as opposed to shots fired. Now, this is the third time I've asked. Give me all the evidence to support that supervisor's conclusion that it was not shots fired, despite all the contemporaneous claims that it was, and despite all of the reaction of your agents that it was. Give me all the evidence to support the theory that it was a vehicle backfiring. And then tell me, why not invest the very minimal resources required to exhaustively search the White House?
Representative, oftentimes in these cases there are a number of different people that make different statements. What I can tell you is that Uniform Division officers on Constitution Avenue heard gunfire and reported gunfire. I can't speak to the specificity of the individual you're talking about that reported it as.
Well, can you speak to why a housekeeper found it and your department did not?
Housekeepers routinely work in the private residence of the President and First Family.
So even when there is overwhelming, let's just say suspicion that shots were fired, we won't say overwhelming evidence because that would have required you to search the premises. Overwhelming suspicion of shots fired, and you don't go through every inch of that residence? I want you to imagine a prosecutor is in front of a jury, Madam Director, because this is where sometimes these cases wind up, and you explain to the jury why a housekeeper found evidence of the shooting and your agency did not.
Representative, again, this case has been prosecuted in Federal court, and those explanations were made before a Federal prosecutor.
And thank the Lord the explanations were sufficient for a jury. Now, I want you to make them sufficient for Congress.
The initial shooting incident occurred at 9:30 at night. It's difficult to see at night.
How about here?
Officers
Can you hear at night?
Officers heard the shots fired on Constitution Avenue. Officers reacted, picked up security positions, swept the area looking for any type of injury, any type of intruder. It was not known until days later that these shots had actually struck the upper level, the third floor level of the White House.
Okay, I'm going to end because I'm out of town with the same question that I began with. Why not search every inch of the White House, given the very small investment of resources? I mean, I went on your website, and I saw that you have training for psychology. You have training for survival skills, none of which I minimize, all of which I'm sure is very important. This is just processing a crime scene, Director. This is not high math. It is processing a crime scene. You actually don't need 18 weeks of training to be able to do that. You just need to walk around. So why wasn't it done?
It is my understanding that a perimeter sweep was done. Was it as thorough as it needed to be?
Evidently
Obviously
not.
Evidently not. Gentleman's time has expired. We'll now